I am holding a loaf of bread my grandmother baked 3 days ago. It is dense, darker than anything on a supermarket shelf. The crust resists when I press it. It does not bounce back. And the smell when I cut into it is something I cannot fully describe. Earthy, warm, like the kitchen itself is alive. I ate 2 thick slices that morning with nothing on them. No butter, no spread, just the bread. I did not bloat. I did not get brain fog. I did not need to lie down an hour later, the way I do after a sandwich from any cafe, any deli, any shop, on any street in this country. I felt full, genuinely full, and then I felt fine. The way eating is supposed to feel. My grandmother has been making this bread her entire life. Same flour, same process, same 4 ingredients: flour, water, salt, yeast, that her mother taught her. She has never had a gut problem. She has never cut bread out of her diet. She has never even heard the phrase gluten sensitivity. And I kept thinking, why does her bread do this to me and supermarket bread does not? So I started digging. What I found made me angry in a way I was not prepared for. Not at a vague system, at specific people, at a specific year, at a decision made in a boardroom that quietly changed what goes into your body and made sure your doctor would never connect it to the way you feel. Here is the number that startled me when I first found it. Before 1960, celiac disease and serious gluten intolerance affected roughly 1 in 2,500 people. Today, it affects 1 in 133. I sat with that for a long time. That is a 19-fold increase in one lifetime. And that is only the people with a clinical diagnosis. Researchers estimate that up to 10% of the population now reacts to something in modern wheat: bloating, brain fog, fatigue, joint pain, without ever testing positive for celiac at all. My grandmother's generation ate bread every day and had none of this. My generation can barely get through a sandwich without consequences. The wheat did not wait for us to develop a sensitivity. Humans have eaten wheat for 10,000 years without this. Something changed. Something specific. Something documented. And when I found the document, I understood everything. Now, let me introduce you to Dr. Hetty Vandenbroek, because her story is what made this real for me. A researcher at Wageningen University, she spent years comparing the protein profiles of wheat varieties grown before 1960 with the modern varieties that replaced them. I went through her published research carefully. The finding is not subtle. The modern wheat contains dramatically higher levels of a specific protein called the glia alpha-9 epitope, the exact protein most directly linked to immune activation and celiac disease in the human gut. Dr. Vandenbroek measured it in a laboratory 40 years later. They were describing the same thing. And then we have our villain, who goes by the name Norman Borlaug. And I want to be careful here, because Borlaug was not a villain in the way we usually mean it. He was an American agronomist from Iowa who genuinely believed he was saving the world. In the 1940s and 1950s, the global population was growing faster than food production could keep up. Famines were real. Starvation was killing people in India and Pakistan and across the developing world. Borlaug, working in Mexico under funding from the Rockefeller Foundation, developed a series of high-yield dwarf wheat varieties that produced 2 to 3 times the grain per acre of traditional wheat. In 1970, he was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize. What was not in his Nobel speech, what nobody was asking about at the time, was what the new protein profile would do to the human gut after 50 years of global consumption. I found the answer in Dr. Vandenbroek's research. The specific protein that her team measured as dramatically elevated in modern wheat, the glia alpha-9 epitope, increased because of the exact hybridization process Borlaug pioneered. He was selecting for yield, for disease resistance, for short stalks that would not fall over. Nobody was selecting for digestibility. Nobody asked. The financial motive to adopt and promote his wheat globally was too powerful for anyone to pause and ask. Cargill and ADM were the grain commodity traders. The agricultural chemical companies that sold the synthetic fertilizers the new dwarf wheat depended on, because unlike deep-rooted heritage grain, the new short-stalked varieties could not pull minerals from the soil without chemical input. They all made the same calculation. The economics were extraordinary. The question of what the new wheat would do to human health after a generation of consumption was never seriously funded. But that is only half the story. Because the wheat itself was only one of 2 changes that happened in the same decade. In 1961, a new bread-making technique was introduced in England called the Chorleywood Bread Process. I went through the original documentation. The process used high-speed mechanical mixing and chemical additives to cut the bread-making time from the traditional 12 to 24 hours down to under 4 hours. Here is what I did not know until I researched this. During a traditional long fermentation, 12 hours, 24 hours, sometimes longer, the wild yeast and bacteria in the dough do something essential. They pre-digest the gluten. They break down the reactive proteins into simpler forms the human gut can handle. They neutralize a compound called phytic acid that blocks mineral absorption and irritates the digestive lining. The Chorleywood process eliminated that window almost entirely. So within the same decade, the wheat was re-engineered to contain more of the protein that triggers immune reactions, and the processing method that made wheat digestible was abandoned in the name of speed and industrial efficiency. Both changes happened. Neither was tested for long-term human health impact before being adopted globally. I want you to feel the financial scale of what this created. The global gluten-free food market is worth $6.5 billion a year. It did not exist before 1990. That $6.5 billion market is the direct commercial consequence of changing the wheat. They created the problem, then they created a premium product category to manage the symptoms of the problem. Then they charged extra for the privilege of eating food that would not make you sick. The disease was profitable twice. Once, when they sold you the wheat that damaged your gut, and again, when they sold you the expensive alternative for people whose guts had been damaged. Meanwhile, the average person with undiagnosed celiac or gluten sensitivity sees 5 to 7 different doctors over an average of 13 years before getting a correct diagnosis. 13 years of tests, misdiagnoses, and medications, many of them for conditions that turn out to be symptoms of a food problem nobody looked for. I think about the people in my own life who spent years being told they had IBS, depression, fibromyalgia, anxiety, chronic fatigue. How many of them were eating their grandmother's bread made with their grandmother's wheat in their grandmother's kitchen and were fine? So what do you actually do with this information?